Most people know Atari as a pioneer of the home console market, but did you know that Atari was also a titan of the arcades? Aside from the excellent consoles it produced, Atari has some of the greatest arcade games ever made. In this edition of the Big Retro Show, I'm going to talk about some of Atari's best arcade games that you probably forgot about or have never heard of. We start things off with a game that may be familiar to most gamers who owned an N64, PS1, or a Dreamcast, but may have never known it started as an arcade game. Gauntlet Legends was an awesome 4-player arcade cabinet that was released by Atari in 1998. The game is a sequel to Atari's excellent Gauntlet games, and much like you do in the previous games, you take on the role of a wizard, warrior, archer, or Valkyrie. But this isn't your granddaddy's Gauntlet. This is an isometric 3D hack and slash that features leveling up through experience, the opportunity to purchase upgrades, and a password system that you could use to re-enter the game if you just happen to run out of quarters, which you will. The action in this game is familiar to anyone who has played a Gauntlet game. As the story goes, you are one of 4 heroes who must defeat an evil demon by traveling to 4 regions, killing the boss, and obtaining the keys that will allow you to access the desecrated temple and banish the demon named Scorn. But that's not all. Aside from obtaining the keys, you must find and collect 12 runestones scattered throughout the regions in order to defeat Scorn. The game lets you choose which region to start in, with the easiest region being the mountain and the most difficult being the desert realm. Much like in the previous games, the name of the game is to kill everything in sight, and most importantly, destroy the monster generators before everything gets too hairy. Each character has both a melee and ranged attack, which is a great addition to the game, and each may use screen clearing potions. Each stage has hidden items you can collect that grant you everything from greater speed to a faster fire rate. The enemies you kill grant you experience that you use to level up and gain more power. Your character has 4 primary abilities in Gauntlet Legends, including strength, speed, armor, and magic that grows stronger with each level. Of course, the class you start the game with determines which of the 4 attributes is stronger from the get-go. The one thing that I don't like about the game is, if you die and choose a different character to play as, you lose all of your progress you made with that character and must start from scratch. The regions you fight in have their own distinct look and feel, and different sets of monsters to fight. It keeps the game interesting and the action fast. The boss fights in this game can be difficult. After all, this is a game that is trying to drain your quarters. But defeating the bosses is probably easier with a friend or 3. At the end of each stage, you are given the opportunity to buy more health, stats, and other items. It's a fun game that you definitely should drop a few quarters in if you see it in the wild. The graphics, sound, character models, and textures used in this game are all on point and add to the game's overall enjoyment. A home version of Gauntlet Legends goes for as low as $21 for the PlayStation for a complete in-box copy, or $17 loose, and as high as $76 complete in-box for the N64 version, or $42 loose according to PriceCharting.com. Almost everyone has heard of Pit Fighter. It was a game that was, well, fun I guess, but also lacked something that other fighting games had. But did you know that Atari released Guardians of the Hood in 1992? Guardians of the Hood is a beat-em-up that features digitized sprites, much like the ones used in Pit Fighter and Mortal Kombat. This game is, how should I put this? So bad and cheesy that it's actually good. It's a beat 'em up in name only, and that's because most of the beating up will be done by your enemies. You and 2 friends can play as one of 4 guardians who must fight off a gang who has taken over your hood. This is vigilante justice at its finest. Throughout your playthrough, you will take on dreads, shavers, and dragons and fight in areas such as a subway, a funhouse, slums, movie theaters, and bars. The goal of the game is to defeat the enemies in each stage and beat up the boss. The cool thing about this game is that once you defeat the boss, you get to play as them in the next stage. In all, after defeating the bosses, you get to play as 7 characters. I thought this was a cool touch and not something that I have seen in any arcade game to date. Each stage is broken up by a training round in which you must defeat your opponent twice or pop another quarter in. If you defeat them, you get to continue on your mission to rid the city of criminals. One of the reasons I say this game is bad is because the controls are really janky. The game hit detection is hilariously bad and the enemies are way overpowered. The game does not respond to you trying to pick up any of the weapons in the game that your enemies can easily pick up, and that sucks. This game also lacks a dash button and grapple attacks. The movesets you can use are limited, but from time to time you can collect stars that will allow you to do a special attack by using a button and joystick combination similar to the ones you use in Street Fighter 2. The music and sounds in this game aren't too bad, but the animations, while entertaining to look at, do not match most of the action that you would expect it to. For example, when you punch someone, you expect them to recoil or even react. In this game, however, they are slow to react or sometimes don't react at all and instead just throw a trash can at you. It's bad. Despite the game's difficulty and controls, I couldn't stop myself from playing this game. I just had to see the next campy cutscene, enemy, or colorful NPC. Alas, the only place you can play this game is in the arcades, as it did not receive a home port. I guess you can say this game is lost at the arcades, probably for a good reason. It's hilariously bad. Thunderjaws is a run and gun released in the arcades in 1990 and is one of the most obscure arcade games you will ever encounter. You play as a secret agent whose mission it is to don some scuba gear and take on Madam Q, who is running experiments to her underwater laboratories. Each stage is divided into 2 parts. The first part is a diving stage in which you fight sharks and frogmen with your harpoon gun. Once you find the underwater entrance to the base, you toss your dive gear to the side and the game stops being a swim and gun and turns into a run and gun. In the second half of the stage, the game is reminiscent of another great Atari classic, Rolling Thunder, and it's during this part of the stage where you find different weapons. As with most run and guns, your job is to make it from one end of the level to the other, where you face off against a level boss. Most of the fights in this game are challenging. After all, this is an arcade game, but extremely beatable with the right amount of quarters. The game's visuals, music, and sound are great, and this is an enjoyable hidden gem of the arcades. The game was ported over to the Atari ST, the Amiga, and the Commodore 64. I couldn't find any information about the pricing of these games, but if you know, leave it in the comments down below. When it comes to the Indiana Jones movies, the Temple of Doom is my absolute favorite. So when I saw the Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom cabinet at a local arcade, I was mesmerized by it. How little did I know that my experience with the machine was going to be quick. Released in 1985, the game follows the events of the movie. You play as Indiana Jones, who is attempting to recover the Shankara stones and rescue the children from the evil Moulin Ram. One of the things that made this game so awesome was the use of digitized speech from the movies. Every now and then, Indy would say one of his one-liners from the film, and Moulin Ram would taunt you while you ran around attempting to free the children. It added a sense of realism to the game. The game also featured the legendary John Williams music from the movie, further adding to the production value. Another highly enjoyable aspect of this game was its graphics. I feel that Atari did a great job on Indy and his enemies. The animations that they used when you whip one of the thugs, swing to another platform using your whip, or race into the minecart stage were top notch for the time. That being said, this game did have its flaws. For one, it was highly challenging, which is no surprise because, well, after all, its job is to get your quarters. From the start, you can choose what difficulty you want to play the game at, but even at the easiest setting, the game will still work you. Another aspect of the game that could use improvement is the variety of the levels. In all, there are about 3 scenes that you can play through. A mine that houses all of the kidnapped children, a minecart race, and the sacrificial altar where the Shankara stones are kept. It would have been cool if you could have played a stage in the jungle or perhaps in the nightclub where you take on the mob boss Lao She. Lastly, it would have also been cool to have wielded more weapons in the game. You arm yourself with only a whip, but how cool would it have been to have wielded a torch or a handgun? Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom was ported to the home computer consoles of the time and to the 8-bit Nintendo. You can snag a copy of the NES version for $55 complete in box and $12 loose. A version for the Commodore 64 will cost $42 complete in box and $20 loose. In keeping with the arcade games based on movies, let's talk about Batman. Released in 1990, Batman is based on the 1989 movie of the same name starring Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, Kim Basinger, and several other great actors. Batman plays like a side-scrolling beat-em-up that mixes in some first-person vehicle stages to spice things up. You play as Batman and arm yourself with your fists, batarangs, gas grenades, and your trusty grappling hook. You fight goons on your way to the end of the stage where a boss is typically waiting for you. The game's horizontal side-scrolling stages are broken up by rides in the Batmobile, where you get to shoot goon cars, and the Batwing, where you collect all of the balloons that are putting Smilex in the air. The game also makes use of digitized voices from the movie, and the graphics and sounds of the game are overall dark and moody, just as a Batman game should be. The level design follows the plot of the movie, so you'll be fighting in the streets of Gotham, at Access Chemical Factory, at the museum, and at a Gotham church. While there is nothing groundbreaking about this game, it is one that does the Batman license justice, and is fun to play to boot. This game is a quarter muncher as well, and you will likely be spending some coin to beat Joker at the end. Definitely consider putting some quarters in this cabinet if you see it in the wild. Let's face it, pirates did not get any love in 80s arcades. That is, until Atari released Skulls and Crossbones to the arcades in 1989. Skulls and Crossbones can be best described as a beat-em-up in which you play as one of two pirates, either One-Eye or Red Dog, who is attempting to secure the treasure stolen from them from an evil wizard. In your quest to recover your treasure, you take on pirates, foot soldiers, and ninjas. You are only armed with a sword throughout the entire game, and collecting coins from your slain enemies will power up your sword. As you make your way through the levels, you will see little X's where you can dig for treasure. Each stage is also laden with treasure and food items that you can use to add more health to your character. Like most beat-em-ups, you must also fight a boss character at the end of the stages, which isn't too difficult but can drain your health quickly enough that you will be putting some more quarters in to get the upper hand. A special mention of the game's graphics should be made, as this is one of the best looking games that Atari has ever made. The sounds and voices used in the game are also of the highest quality. This is a game that is highly beatable with the right amount of quarters. Skulls and Crossbones is a relatively short game and you can probably play through it in roughly 20 minutes. Much like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, this game also lets you choose your difficulty. Skulls and Crossbones was ported over to the NES and the ZX Spectrum. A copy of the game for the NES goes for $49 complete in box and $14 loose. Anyone who watches the Big Retro Show knows that I typically don't play racing games, mostly because I commute to and from work and don't find it thrilling at all to get into a car in a video game. Anyhow, it's hard to ignore a good game when you see it, and for me that was California Speed. Being from California, I love it when games represent my state, and this one does not disappoint. Players can race in tracks representing the best scenery that this state has to offer. You get to choose from one of 4 cars and then choose the transmission you would like, and then you're off. Full disclosure, I am horrible at racing games and find myself veering off track most of the time. I didn't find myself, though, doing this in California Speed too much because of the game's excellent controls. Something happened while I played this game. I forgot that I don't like racing games and I found myself having fun, and it's for this reason that I included this game in this video. The graphics of California Speed and the rocking tunes had a lot to do with my enjoyment of the game, but perhaps the best aspect of the game is the way that the vehicles handle. California Speed was ported over to the N64, and a complete in-box copy of the game goes for $56. A loose copy goes for $14. Have you played this game? In an attempt to cash in on the fighting game craze that was kickstarted by games like Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, Atari released the 3D weapon-wielding fighting game Mace The Dark Age to the arcades in 1997. As the story goes, you play as a chosen warrior whose job it is to fight your way through a tournament to save the world. You are trying to take down a dark arts connoisseur who wields the fabled Mace of Tanis, a weapon that grants everlasting life and extreme power! You choose from one of 10 characters ranging from the Viking warrior Ragnar Bloodaxe to the desert assassin Al-Rashid and everyone in between. The game follows a basic formula that Street Fighter II made so famous. You must face off in a best 2 out of 3 match with your opponent using special moves that you do with the joystick and the buttons. Mace's graphics make use of Atari's Voodoo Graphics, which is a powerful but low-cost 3D graphics accelerator chipset built by 3DFX and made to go into PCs. While playing this game, it reminded me of other weapons-based fighting games that were popular at the time. Much like Mortal Kombat, this game also allows fatalities that it calls executions. While this game is nothing groundbreaking, it's awesome to see Atari in the mix with their own fighting game. Mace The Dark Age was ported over to the N64 and fetches $85 complete in box and $19 loose for a copy. One of the best aspects of going to the arcades is finding great light gun games to play, and Maximum Force is one of them. Released in the arcades in 1997 and co-developed with Midway Games, Maximum Force took what worked well with Area 51 and made it into its own. Much like Area 51, Maximum Force uses digitized video to draw enemies, innocents, and explosions, and pre-rendered 3D graphics for the levels. It's a winning combination that gives this game its charm. You take on the role of a counter-terrorist who is attempting to liberate 3 areas from terrorist control. There's not a whole lot to the story, but that's okay. We don't usually go to the arcades for the stories. The gameplay is familiar to anyone who has played a light gun game and consists of shooting everything in sight while attempting not to shoot the innocents who insert themselves in the gunfights. Speaking of the gunfights, they aren't too difficult and you can breeze through this game in about 25 minutes. The game also features several power-ups that you can use to murder the terrorists. I found myself laughing at the innocents and the campy enemies throughout my playthrough, and could only imagine how much fun the actors used in this game still have at seeing themselves in this game. The gameplay is simple and does not change the formula established by Area 51 too much, and this is why it got a lot of criticism. At any rate, this is still a fun game that everyone should play at least once. Maximum Force received ports on the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. A complete copy goes for $80 for the North American Saturn and $300 for the PAL Saturn. A loose copy goes for $45 in North America and $246 for the PAL version. Same game for the PlayStation goes for $26 complete in box and $14 loose. We're ending this episode with a doozy. Talk about a quarter muncher. War: The Final Assault is a unique arcade game released by Atari and Midway in 1999. The game is a first-person shooter that allows you to switch to a third-person viewpoint with the press of a button. The game has 2 main modes, a story mode that you can take on with 3 other friends, each on their own cabinet of course, and a head-to-head deathmatch. The game's campaign is made up of 8 levels with various enemies and a boss fight at the end of each stage. You can pick from 4 characters, each having their own strengths and weaknesses. As you kill enemies, you gain ranks that don't really have an effect on the gameplay, but grant you some bragging rights among your chums. The game is littered with various weapons and health items that will assist you in your playthrough. Each level also has its share of secret areas where you can find one of 6 Pentabolt keys needed to gain access to the mission that leads to the destruction of the alien mothership. The game's controls take a bit getting used to. Movement is accomplished by pressing one of 4 buttons that allow you to strafe and move forward and backward. Aiming is achieved through an analog joystick that has a trigger button allowing you to fire your weapon. It also has a drop button in case you find a better weapon. 2 additional buttons allow you to jump and change your viewpoint from first person to third person on the fly. Although it's a lot of damn buttons, it's quite easy to pick up. The story in this game isn't too difficult to understand or convoluted. It centers around your team's efforts to take down the Russian regime. Sound familiar? Your team invades Siberia on your hunt for the ruthless General Yuri, who we later find out is really an alien. He totally reminds no one of M. Bison or this guy. You will be spending your entire allowance on this game and maybe your friend's allowance if you want to beat it, because the bosses and most of the enemies are overpowered. An N64 and a PlayStation version of this game were planned, but were never released. Have you ever played this game? What do you think? And that's going to do it for this episode of The Big Retro Show. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.